This is a forgery. For the real thing, come to the Abraham Lincoln Bookshop in Chicago.
You talk about barbecue and at political rallies. Political rallies were social events from miles around. People would come in a social gatherings, people eat. And you talked about the barbecue and mostly made in pits, is what you're saying. What sort of meat was used usually?
You see people, when you look at descriptions of those political rallies and people eating barbecues, and you're feeding, 100 people, 5,000 people, you're feeding, so you need a substantial piece of meat. So people are using, a whole hog, a whole lamb, or, sheep, which would be mutton, of course, or half a steer. And it's the kind of thing where you dig a pit and you burn down coals, and then you put the meat in there and you cover it with something to keep it moist and let it cook all day or all night, and then you bring it out and start slicing it up.
Well, you also talk about burgoo.
Burgoo, which is
What is burgoo?
it's a big
And
pot
can
of
we get
stew.
it today?
Yes, actually there are places, certainly in Minnesota, and I imagine out in Illinois too, and around the country, where people have burgoo fundraising events. So you have like a pot like the size of this table, and you fill it with meat and vegetables, and again cook it outside, and it cooks all day, and you, depending on where you are, you stir it with a 2x4 or an oar, and make this wonderful, rich, savory stew. The problem that I thought, as I thought about, well, how are you feeding 5,000 people without paper plates or disposable spoons, that it struck me that although some people assume that was what people ate at political rallies, it seemed a tad untidy to me. So I began to look for, again, a period voice that could give me a suggestion of what might have been served. And I found a wonderful reminiscence where they talk about a political rally in Illinois where they talk about having huge loaves of bread, and that people would tear the loaves of bread apart, and that became sort of the plate and the napkin and the container for the food. And then when you were done, it was all gone, and the narrator went on to say, so who needs forks and spoons when you have this bread?
The original sandwich. Huh?
Or bread bowl. Don't some restaurants
bread
serve
bowls.
things in bread bowls these days?
There was a hog butchering operation in New Salem in a mill.
Mm-hmm.
So did Lincoln get involved in either of those since he liked the kitchen?
We know that he ran the mill, the flour grinding mill, corn grinding mill, in New Salem for a while, because he reports that he did.
Mm-hmm.
And that in reporting that, it gave him insights into because that mill was powered by the river. It gave him a unique perspective on how the river rose and fell. And that gave him an opportunity to say, river transportation would be very useful, but it's not reliable, as he's campaigning in his first campaigns for the Illinois
Well,
legislature.
he was a Whig and interested in internal
Improvements.
transportation.
Yeah, and so the way to improve the transportation is to have railroads instead. And of course, I suggest that on his trip to New Orleans, he saw a railroad. There was one that had opened the month before he got there that ran from New Orleans to Lake Pontchartrain. And although it was a railroad in that the car ran on rails, it was drawn by horses.
Yeah.
So he had a sense of what could be. And there were other mechanically powered railroads appearing around the country at that time. So he had a sense of it. And so we know, as a long way around to get to the story, he did grind wheat and corn at the mill. And the hog butchery was, from what they found in the archaeology of New Salem, they found this large site which probably could have handled hundreds of hogs in a day. And of course, in those times, the hogs would either be in the farmyard or, more commonly, just out in the fields or out in the forest, eating the acorns and whatnot that fell, what they call the mast, that fell to the ground. And then you'd notch their ears so you could tell your hogs from everybody else's. And then come fall, when it was cool enough, you would bring the hogs all into a central location and, have at it. and set up an assembly line for disassembling the hog. So I'm assuming as a strong young man of the community, he would have been involved in that operation because, you have to not only slaughter the hog, you then, in order to make use of everything but the squeal, you hoist the carcass up and you scrape the hairs off, and that becomes things that you make hairbrushes out of, so it's a marketable commodity. And you can, of course, tan the leather, and, of course, eat everything else.
It was interesting that you spoke about something hadn't really thought about, the excavation of the Lincoln family garbage.
Oh, yes.
And how the garbage came up, and you could think about what was being served at that household.
Yeah, it's a
What came up?
A precious time capsule that had, you had asked about fruit earlier, there was a peach pit that they found in there.
How far, where was this in the ground?
This is, well, it wouldn't have been very deep, and it was sort of off the back porch. And when they slid the house when they slid one room of the house sideways in the 1850s, they covered over what had been the 1840s refuse area. So they found turkey bones, they found steak bones, they found a peach pit, some eggshells, those kinds of things. So you begin to get a little window into it. And another thing that they found interesting, and archaeologists have found in other homes of that era, are pig's feet, bones from pig's feet. And I kind of went out on a theoretical, imaginary limb here, because what you get out of either you can make barbecue pig's feet out of them, which is a tasty thing to eat, but the other thing you can get from pig's feet is gelatin, like Jell-O before we had Jell-O, to make fancy desserts. And some folks have suggested that middle-class women of the era would refine the gelatin out of these pig's feet, which is a 2-day process, and make fancy pudding out of it. I started to think about it from the point of view again of a cook and a mother, and would you really spend 2 days going through this refining process? But what else do you make from it? Well, what you make from it is, and it's something that you see in a lot of the cookbooks of the era, of sustaining soup for someone who is ill. So calf's foot jelly soup, calf's foot soup. And so that led me to consider that when Eddie was dying, that may have been the reason why someone would have gone through that lengthy process. Eddie, their second son, developed, they're suggesting it was tuberculosis, other scholars say, and it took him several weeks to finally succumb to his illness. And at that point, the house is set up so that the kitchen is, again, an open hearth, and it's right next to the bedroom where Eddie is ill. And so my vision, again, something that I created using the food as hints to take me there to try and understand, is that this would have been something that Mary made is a sustaining soup to try and help Eddie get better. So it's what do you do with this pig's feet clue, and that's where I took it. Could have been barbecued pig's feet for that matter, but I think not.
I'm going to put you to work signing for us, please.
My
You just
pleasure.
open right up and sign, or either place you'd like. And I just want to shout out to a few people here. We have more, but Rob in Holt, Michigan, and Donna, Charlestown, Indiana, Gordon in Lena, Illinois. Thanks, Gordy. Harold in Pottsville, Pennsylvania. I wanted to go back, because our time is now getting limited, that were there condiments used in the day?
Oh, if it didn't move, you pickled it. Because that again is a way to keep things through from the harvest to the next season. There are also a lot of ketchups, which are sort of a variant of pickles. And again, you're ketchuping. There's a lemon ketchup. There's a tomato ketchup. There's a walnut ketchup. So yes, there are a wide variety of condiments. Not so much mustards, I don't think, but you see a wide range of pickles and ketchups.
Just very briefly, the grocery ledgers in Springfield must have been a mine for you for what the Lincolns were buying.
There's
A lot of sugar.
Well, that's another one of those myths that I kind of looked at, again, with an eye of a cook. Because a lot of people have said, well, gosh, they bought, pounds of sugar, and they must have had just this huge sweet tooth. But if you look at how their sugar, I put all the purchases on a spreadsheet. And I sort of looked at it, day by day, month, through each month, and looked at it, and there are 6 people in the household. And if you look at, you're baking everything from scratch because, although there are bakeries in town, it's not the way we go to the grocery store and, buy our donuts and our cakes and our processed foods. Mary with help are cooking them all in the house. So if you do an analysis of 6 people with maybe, coffee with sugar in it with this kind of baked recipe, they ate less sugar per person than we do, according to the USDA. So although it looks like you're buying a lot when you're buying it in 5-pound chunks every other week, if you look at how it would have been used in the household, it's really not that much.
Was there any other surprise that you saw on the ledgers that they were
There was
buying?
a wonderful thing. At one point she writes, they write on the ledger, salt for ice cream. And that's like, oh my God! And it's at the height of strawberry season when Mary writes, that in a letter to a friend, we're in strawberry season and we're having strawberry parties every day because of course it's the harvest and you've got to eat them up or make them into jam, of course. But the salt for ice cream led me to the assumption that they're making ice cream, of course, and that they might well have made strawberry ice cream. And the strawberry ice cream of the era is kind of half cream with a lot of strawberry in it. So it's sort of a cross between a sherbet and an ice cream. It's really, really good.
And do you have a recipe for
I
that?
do indeed.
All right. Do you have a recipe in there? Well, we're so pleased to have had Rae Eimey here for this, and Smithsonian Books. Thank you for bringing her. And I also want to say thank you to Mayhaven Publishing for getting books signed from Wayne for us to have here as well. I think you would like both of these. We'll have signed books ready for you if you'd like to have them, and they're a great duo. I think you would like them. And there's so much more in each of them, and in your book as well. There's just so much more in there. And don't forget to read the notes. You'll like that. Some upcoming programs.